So I'm going to just read through text 50 and its purport, and then we can responsibly do 51. Tvam nam suranam asasan vayanam kutastha adya purusha puranaha tvam deva sakyam guna karma yonao retas tvajayam kavimaddadeja. And the translation for this one reads, you are the original personal founder of all the demigods and the orders of different gradations. And yet, you are the oldest and are unchanged. O Lord, you have no source or superior. You have impregnated the external energy with the semen of the total living entities, yet you are unborn. So, I'll reread the verse here. You are the original personal founder of all the demigods and orders of different gradations, yet you are the oldest and are unchanged. O Lord, you have no source or superior. You have impregnated the external energy with the semen of the total living entities, yet you are unborn. Purport. The Lord, the original person, is the father of all other living entities, beginning from Brahma, the personality, from whom all other living entities in different gradations of species are generated. Yet the Supreme Father has no other father. Every one of the living entities of all grades up to Brahma, the original creature of the universe, is begotten by a father. But he, the Lord, has no father. When he descends on the material plane out of his causeless mercy, he accepts one of his great devotees as his father to keep pace with the rules of the material world. But since he is the Lord, he is always independent in choosing who will become his father. For example, the Lord came out of a pillar in his incarnation as Nrsingadev, and by the Lord's causeless mercy, Ahalya came out of a stone by the touch of the lotus feet of his incarnation as Lord Sri Ram. He is also the companion of every living entity as the Supersoul, but he is unchanged. The living entity changes his body in the material world, but even when the Lord is in the material world, he is ever unchanged. That is his prerogative. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14.3, the Lord impregnates the external or material energy, and thus the total living entities later come out in different gradations, beginning from Brahma, the first demigod, down to the insignificant ant. All the gradations of living entities are manifest by Brahma and the external energy, but the Lord is the original father of everyone. The relationship of every living being with the Supreme Lord is certainly one of son and father, but not one of equality. Sometimes, in love, the son is more than the father, but the relationship of the father and son is one of superior and subordinate. Every living entity, however, great he may be, even up to demigods like Brahma and Indra, is eternally subordinate servitor of the Supreme Father. The Mahat Tat principle is a generating source of all the modes of material nature, and the living entities take birth in the material world in bodies supplied by the mother material nature. In terms of their previous work, the body is a gift of material nature, but the soul is originally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. The body is a gift of material nature, but the soul is originally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. I can't see. Is this thing cutting off the bottom half of my face? If you look in the camera there, you can flip the screen around and see whether it is, and then flip it back for me. So you can see my whole face, okay. It's hard to tell what's going on. You could flip it back if you would. All right, so here is the verse that we're going to responsibly do. Tato vayam mat pramukha, tato vayam mat pramukha yadarte, tato vayam mat pramukha yadarte, Bhabu vimatman karavama kimte. Babu vivatman karavama kimte. Tvam nasva chakshu paridehi saktya. Tvam nasva chakshu paridehi shaktya. Deva kriyarte yadanugrahanam. Deva kriyarte yadanugrahanam. Tato vayamat pramukha yadarte. Babu vimatman karavama kingte. Tvam nasva chakshu paridehi shaktya. Deva kriyarte yadanugrahanam. Tato vayamat pramukha yadarte. Babu vivatman karavama kingte. Tvam nasa chakshu paridehi shaktya. Deva kriyarte yadanugrahanam. Tato vayamat pramukha yadarte. Babu vimatman karavama kingte. Tvam nasa chakshu paridehi saktya. Deva kriyarte yadanugrahanam. Tato vayamat pramukha yadarte. Babu vimatman karavama kingte. Tvam nasva chakshu paridehi shaktya. Deva kriyarte yadanugrahanam. Ladies, if anyone wants to, you like to chant? Tato vayamat pramukha yadarte. Babu vivatman karavama kingte. Tvam nasva chakshu paridehi shaktya. Deva kriyarte yadanugrahanam. You've got great eyes to be able to see that at that distance. All right, so the translation reads, O Supreme Self, please give us, who are created in the beginning from the Mahatat, the total cosmic energy, your kind directions on how we shall act. Kindly award us your perfect knowledge and potency so that we can render you service in different departments of subsequent creation. So I say, and you all please repeat, O Supreme Self, please give us, who are created in the beginning from the Mahatattva, the total cosmic energy, your kind directions on how we shall act. Kindly award us your perfect knowledge and potency so that we can render you service in the different departments of subsequent creation. Okay, here's the purport. The Lord creates this material world and impregnates the material energy with the living entities who will act in the material world. All these actions have a divine plan behind them. The plan is to give the conditioned souls who so desire a chance to enjoy sense gratification. But there is another plan behind creation, to help the living entities realize that they are created for the transcendental sense gratification of the Lord and not for their individual sense gratification. This is the constitutional position of the living entities. The Lord is one without a second, and he expands himself into many for his transcendental pleasure. All of the expansions, Vishnu Tattvas, Jiva Tattvas, and Shakti Tattvas, the personalities of Godhead, the living entities, and the different potential energies, are different offshoots from the same one Supreme Lord. The Jiva Tattvas are separated expansions of the Vishnu Tattvas, and although they are potential differences between them, they are meant for the transcendental sense gratification of the Supreme Lord. Some of the Jivas, however, wanted to lord it over material nature in imitation of the lordship of the personality of Godhead. Regarding when and why such propensities overcame the pure living entities, it can only be explained that the Jiva Tattvas have infinitesimal independence, and due to the misuse of this independence, some of the living entities have become implicated in the conditions of cosmic creation and are therefore called Nitya Buddhas, or eternally conditioned souls. The expansions of Vedic wisdom also give the Nitya Buddhas, the conditioned living entities, a chance to improve. And those who take advantage of such transcendental knowledge gradually regain their lost consciousness of rendering transcendental loving service to the Lord. The demigods are amongst the conditioned souls who have developed this pure consciousness of service to the Lord, but who, at the same time, continue to desire to lord it over material nature. Such mixed consciousness puts a conditioned soul into the position of managing the affairs of this creation. The demigods are entrusted leaders of the conditioned souls. As some of the old prisoners in government jails are entrusted with some responsible work of prison management, so the demigods are improved conditioned souls, acting as the representatives of the Lord in the material creation. Such demigods are devotees of the Lord in the material world, and when completely free from material desire to lord it over the material energy, they become pure devotees and have no desire but to serve the Lord. Therefore, any living entity who desires a position in the material world may desire so in the service of the Lord, and may seek power and intelligence from the Lord, as exemplified by the demigods in this particular verse. One cannot do anything unless he is enlightened and empowered by the Lord. The Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 15:15, Mata smritir jnanam apohanam chap. All recollections, knowledge, etc., as well as all forgetfulness, are engineered by the Lord, who is sitting within the heart of everyone. The intelligent man seeks help of the Lord, and the Lord helps the sincere devotee engage in his multifarious services. The demigods are entrusted by the Lord to create different species of living entities according to their past deeds. They are herein asking the favor of the Lord for the intelligence and power to carry out their task. Similarly, any conditioned soul may engage in the service of the Lord under the guidance of an expert spiritual master, and thus gradually become freed from entanglement from material existence. The spiritual master is the manifested representative of the Lord, and anyone who puts himself under the guidance of a spiritual master and acts accordingly is said to be acting in terms of buddhi yoga, as explained in Bhagavad Gita 2:14. 41. Vyavasayatmika buddhir ekeha kurunandana bahushakha hiyanantascha buddhayo vyavasayinam. The sins, the Bhaktivedanta purports of the third canto, 5th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Vidura's Talks with Maitreya. So, let me get my little...
Now your laptop's on the screen.
Now my laptop's on the screen, okay. Good. Where did it go? Oh. Can someone do me a favor and bring that striped bag over here for me? Maybe I put it here. Yes, I did. Never mind. I've got what I wanted. My little memory sheet here. Okay, so this first verse that we talked about, 50, is a discussion about the Supreme Lord being the original source of everything and everybody. So, Krishna is the father of everyone, as Prabhupada pointed to Bhagavad Gita, this verse 14.3, which is, we can go right there, Mama Yonir Mahad Brahma Tasmin Garba Dadhami Aham Sambhava Sarvabhutanam Tato Bhavati Bharata. So, the total material substance called Brahma is the source of birth. And it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making possible the birth of all living beings, O son of Bharat. So, there's also the verse Aham Bijam Pradapita, which is the next one, Sarva Yonesha Kanteya Murteya Sambhavantiya Tasman Brahma Mahad Yonir Aham Bija Pradapita. It should be understood that of all species of life, O son of Kunti, are made possible by birth in this material nature, and I am the seed-giving father. So this is pretty straightforward. We've been discussing the idea of creation. As we see, we started off in this chapter 5 of the third canto, with Vidura approaching Maitreya. And Vidura approached Maitreya to find out about how the universe was created. And so up till about verse 38, Maitreya was hearing questions from Vidura, and then he began to explain how the creation works. And then he got to the point where he explained that there are demigods created. And that's when we started this section of the 5th chapter of 3rd canto, where the demigods are offering prayers. So the demigods are an essential part of the expansion of the creation. And they are sourced from the Supreme Lord. And as Prabhupada explained in the purport we just read on 51, that the demigods actually are like the first-class prisoners in the jail. That's I wonder, it probably doesn't sit too well with them. They are only the first-class prisoners. We are the last-class prisoners, the ones that didn't get the any special treatment because we're still too wild. So the demigods are given a chance to control the material world, and that's what they do. Why do they control the world? Well, there's lots of things that need control, just as in a city like New York. We have the electrical system or the water system. Certainly it's mechanical to a large part, but there are also people, supervisors, sitting in rooms watching dials and there in case something goes wrong. So similarly, in our material universe, it's the same way. There are certainly mechanical aspects of it, but as well, there are people monitoring what's going on. And these demigods are the first-class prisoners who still want to lord it over material nature, but not as much as some of the rest of us do. So therefore, they are given a position of control. And generally speaking, the demigods are really organizing how karma is visited on living entities according to the kind of activities they do. So what we find out is that the material nature is the source. And this is a sticking point here, material nature is the source. The Supreme Lord impregnates material nature. He does it by his glancing at material nature. We'll hear about that. But what we want to know at this stage, and what the verse was kind of touching on, is this idea of, well, where do the living entities actually come from? So some years back, there was a great controversy in ISKCON, the fall of the Jiva controversy, which you all were not here at that time to experience. And it went through a lot of things. The GBC put out a book called Our Original Position, OOP. Our original, right? And there was a very nice explanation written by Dhruta Karma, which I will look at in a minute. And here, the question before us is, do the living entities start out in the material world, or do they come from a relationship with Krishna? Or do they come from the Viraja River, or do they descend to the material world from the Brahmajyoti? These are various answers that are given in various places. And there was a book written called In Vaikuntha, Not Even the Leaves Fall, by Satyanarayan and Kundali, I think. I forgot if those are the two people who wrote the book. And they put forward the idea that no one falls from the spiritual world ever. So therefore, the living entities actually come from the material world. And basically, they put forward the idea that Prabhupada really didn't believe that we come from the spiritual world. But as a preaching strategy, he explained that kind of scenario to us. And this was not accepted by the GBC, and this book was banned, and the GBC wound up writing or having commissioned a book, which we just talked about, the Our Original Position book. And you will find that this topic comes up every once in a while, Do the living entities actually come from the Brahmajyoti? It would seem like, according to today's verse, that maybe this is so. We're hearing about, the living entities coming out of the Brahmajyoti, But the Supreme Lord places them there by his vision. We have that in another place. So where do they really come from? Now, the final conclusion of Our Original Position book and the final conclusion of Dhruta Karma's Origin of the Jiva book are both the same, that Prabhupada always explained to us that we were with Krishna, we had a relationship with Krishna, and due to misuse, we hear that in today's verse, due to misuse of our minute independence, we want to lord it over like Krishna does, and therefore, as a result, we come to this material world. Now, once we come to this material world, certainly we can come in and out of various places and experiences via the Brahmajyoti. So, in another place, and it's described, and this is why I think there's this confusion about this issue, is the idea that the living entities are described as tatastha shakti. Tatastha means the shoreline or the boundary between the water and the dry land. So they are marginal. And it's described that like sparks coming from a fire. The fire is the Supreme Lord, and these sparks pop out of the fire. So there are many sparks coming out, and they are tiny. And here we're finding that the Brahmajyoti is the light rays, or the brilliant effulgence of the Supreme Lord, which is indeed comprised of living entities, these sparks. But were they always sparks? In the spiritual world, the living entities are not sparks. They have a fully developed form. And I was also reading in How the Universe Was Created and Our Purpose in It by our Sri Nandanandana, or Stephen Knapp, that the acharyas have explained that the living entity, when he goes back to the spiritual world, his sparkness expands back out into his actual form, whatever the form is of the living entity. So similarly, for us to become a spark, we have to be on the way out of the spiritual world. So, as Prabhupada explained in the purport on today's verse, that it's due somehow or other to the misuse of our minute independence. The Supreme Lord is supremely independent, and the Supreme Lord can do anything that he likes. But most of us have probably, at least I hope, come to the conclusion that we are not able to do anything. You know, if someone doubts this, then please jump 10 feet into the air right now to prove that you can do anything. So obviously there are things that we cannot do. And the Supreme Lord is not in that same fix. And as Prabhupada says, when the living entity comes, he is bound by the laws of material nature and is placed in a material body. Whereas the Supreme Lord is never bound by material nature, and he's never placed in a material body. He never changes. So the question then is it true that the living entities come from the Brahmajyoti? In one sense it is, in the sense that once in the material world, if a living entity is still alive at the time when the material energy winds up, either at the end of Brahma's day or at the end of Brahma's life, then the living entity goes back into the body of Mahavishnu. Sankarshan, in his form as Mahavishnu, is the reservoir of all the Jivas. So then they can come back out similarly through the agency of the Brahmajyoti. And that's where that figures into the whole picture. But what we are interested in is there some evidence that this is really what Prabhupada is indicating? Well, I will put a few things forward to show, and this is a controversial issue, especially if you're talking with devotees who are not in ISKCON. In fact, oftentimes, if you're talking to other Gaudiya Math devotees, they will push this issue, that ISKCON mistakenly thinks that we came from the spiritual world, when that's basically what Prabhupada taught us that we did. And it's also very reasonable. I just recently saw a video that Sadhaputta put out where he's talking about also the origin of the Jiva. Our philosophy stops making sense when we talk about the idea that we have actually come from the Brahmajyoti. I've always understood that we came to the material world because we did something wrong. If we did something wrong, that means we had to be a person at some time. That means we had to have a relationship. Otherwise, if we were eternally in the material world, it wasn't our fault that we're here. We're here because it's our nature. But we hear that our nature is not faulty. Our nature is pure. And if there's any doubt, I just submit that anyone in the Veda base does a search on our original spiritual nature or our original spiritual relationship. You'll see how many times Prabhupada uses that term. Here we have nature or relationship and original. So if our original nature was not fully developed, or our original nature was not in Krishna consciousness, then why are we going back to that? It wouldn't make sense. Similarly, we see that Prabhupada named his magazine Back to Godhead. He did not call it Up to Godhead. He called it back. And that preposition is a very important thing. And we see all throughout Prabhupada's explanation of our situation here, we are told to revive our original consciousness. We're told to go back to the spiritual world. We're talking about restoring our original consciousness. All these things make no sense if we weren't originally in a relationship with the Supreme Lord as a person. However, people say that in Jiva Dharma, and it's also in other places, this idea of us coming from the spiritual world. There's oftentimes it's quoted that Bhaktisiddhanta wrote about that. In fact, he did. I've heard it talked about so many times, but nobody could ever give me any kind of actual source on any of this. Finally, I've come across it in Stephen Knapp's book, where he or Sri Nandanan's book, where he explains the origin of the species. And he discusses that in Brahmana and Vaishnava, Bhaktisiddhanta does indeed talk about the living entity coming from the Brahmajyoti. But of course the question is, does that actually indicate the original origin, or simply the origin once one is in the material world? That's the question. And it seems quite plain, and indeed in ISKCON there was a controversy about this issue, and Prabhupada did resolve the issue by speaking about it directly. So that seems to have solved it. But still the controversy goes on, and you will find even people in ISKCON who do not agree with this understanding. So I'm a peanut, but I'm just giving my understanding of it and explaining it. I think Dhruta Karma does an excellent job, and in the Veda base, his description of resolving this particular issue is a little quicker and easier to get through than the original, our original position that was commissioned by the GBC, which is much more involved. It takes much more time to come to the same conclusion. But he explains that Prabhupada was asked the question directly. He did not explain that we come from the Brahmajyoti. He did not explain that we come from the Viraja River, nor that we were eternally conditioned in the material world, nor that we were created at some point in time. We know that the living entity is eternal. Na tvayavaham jatu nasam, na tvam nemi janadhipaha, na chaiva, na bhavishyama sarvavayam ataparam. Never did you not exist, nor me, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. That's what Krishna is telling Arjuna. So the living entity is eternal. The question is, what's he been doing all that time for eternity, So if we've never been to the spiritual world, that means for an entire past eternity, we have not been in association with Krishna. But at the same time, we hear that the living entity is eternal servant of Krishna, Nitya Krishna Das, that the living entity is eternally servant of Krishna. It's not that he's just gets that way when he does the right thing once he's in the material world. So These things don't make sense. Plus, for another evidence, in Bhagavatam, in 4th canto, there is the story of Pranjana and the city of 9 gates. This is an allegorical story, the story of Pranjana. But in, what's the verse here? 4:28-53, the secret friend comes, and he's speaking with Pranjana, and he says, "Don't you remember we had an intimate relationship, but you left me?" Those words are there in Srimad Bhagavatam. We had an intimate, of course it's the Supreme Lord who's talking, that Pranjana had a relationship. Like two swans we were living together, but now we are separated because you wanted to enjoy. So that's the purpose of the material world. And the living entities, when they misuse their independence, they find themselves being imported into the material world. And of course, in one sense, no one ever falls. That's also true, because it's like we're asleep when we're here. So if you're asleep in your bed upstairs and you're dreaming of somewhere else, like for instance, when I'm living here in New York, I have dreams about New Vrindavan, and when I'm in New Vrindavan, I have dreams about being in New York. And what's curious is that both these dream places, New Vrindavan dream world and New York dream world, look nothing like the real New York or the real New Vrindavan. But somehow or another in my dreams, I take it as completely veridical that this is New York or this is New Vrindavan. So if I'm dreaming that I'm in New Vrindavan and I'm in my bed upstairs, does that mean I'm in New Vrindavan? Well, in one sense, yes. In another sense, no. So did I go to New Vrindavan? While I'm asleep, I certainly thought I was. And when we're asleep, we certainly take our dream as veridical. I mean, even though crazy stuff is happening in those dreams, while we're asleep, we believe every minute of it, that I'm falling off a tree, or that I found some money, or that I'm flying in the sky, We never even stop to question. And crazy stuff is going on in those dreams. But we take it as veridical. But when we wake up, we think, what a crazy dream, So just see. So in one sense, we don't fall. In another sense, we do. So Prabhupada also said that we didn't fall, but he said it in that context. So again, these are various evidences I would put forward, and I want to stop so we have time for some kind of back and forth. So Prabhupada named his magazine, his main magazine, Back to Godhead, not Up to Godhead. There's a section in 4th canto where the unknown friend is describing that he and Pranjana had an intimate relationship. There is the fact that if you Google, or not Google, but do a string search on Prabhupada's Veda base, you'll see how many times Prabhupada refers to our original position, returning, going back, reviving, all these prefixed words with the RE prefix, which means that we're returning to something that we once were, not that we're going to something for the first time. And similarly, according to Sadaputta, which he does a nice explanation of it too in the YouTube video where he's describing the origin of the Jiva, where he says that our philosophy doesn't make sense if we accept the idea that we originally came from the Brahmajyoti, because then we didn't make a mistake. We were always here. It was part of our baked-in reality, Anyway, a topic like this certainly requires much more time than we have today, but I wanted to kind of touch it because it seemed like it was kind of right there in front of us as far as the and that's part of creation, is how does the living entity get stuck into it, like some yeast into bread dough, so we have the material energy, which is like the flour, and then you got the yeast that goes into it, makes it blimp up so that later it can be baked and you can have yeasted bread, but any feedback or questions about this one?
Thank you, Maharaj, for giving the nice, brief explanation on such a vast topic that many books have been written in different devotees. I don't know if you can make a comment on this, because I've also heard all these back and forth things, and it's a very deep issue. But one thing that I read in Krishna book that kind of confused me, because it seems to contradict things. So in chapter 28, Prabhupada's talking about going back to Godhead. I guess I'll just read it. The fact is that those who are always engaged in Krishna consciousness and mature, pure devotional service are given the chance after death to gain Krishna's association in one of the universes within the material world. Krishna's pastimes are continuously going on, either in this universe or another universe. Just as the sun globe is passing over many places across this earthly planet, so Krishna Leela, or the transcendental advent and pastimes of Krishna, are also going on continuously, either in this or another universe. The mature devotees, who have completely executed Krishna consciousness, are immediately transferred to the universe where Krishna is appearing. In that universe, the devotees get their first opportunity to associate with Krishna personally and directly. The training goes on, as we see in Vrindavan Leela of Krishna within this planet. Krishna therefore revealed the actual features of Vaikuntha planets, so the inhabitants of Vrindavan could know their destination. So he's saying this is the first opportunity.
Right. This is, I think, I'm happy you made this statement, or you pointed to this particular thing. We have to understand things always in context. In human speech or in human interaction, there's something called ellipsis. That is, that you leave things out. If two people are communicating, it's natural, and in fact it's expected, that we talk about some things and we leave some things out. I could say, Dwight D. Eisenhower is still dead. Of course, it's true, but what does it have to do with what we're discussing at this point? Nothing. So the context here that Prabhupada isn't saying is that it's the first time within the context of coming into the material world, not first time absolutely, This kind of thing comes up a lot, and I think it's easy to get tripped up because in the wrong context, our philosophy stops making sense. You always have to figure out within what framework we're discussing. And what Prabhupada doesn't say or go on to say is that the first time in the context of being within the material world, not absolutely. That's how I would respond to that question. If someone is responding to it, by saying it was the first time period, absolutely, then we have all those other problems of explaining why Krishna says that, in Bhagavatam, why it says that the two swans were together, why Prabhupada called it back to Godhead, why he uses all those terms. So I think that's a simple, just context issue, that seen within the right context, then that doesn't create a problem. And there are many other instances of that same principle at work in when we try to understand our philosophy, where something is said, like, for instance, we hear the demigods are deathless. In fact, sometimes they're actually called Amar. That's a Sanskrit term for them. But literally, they aren't Amar. They just live for a long period of time. What's that?
Hell is eternal.
Right. So it's not actually eternal, but it goes on for long enough. Right, and most of the travel brochures for there, I would doubt. I don't think I would want to go there. So I think that's a place that we should try to avoid, no matter how long it goes on, even if it isn't eternal. I'm sure it feels that way. And we hear that they're Nitya Buddhas. Prabhupada explains that one, that they're living entities who are eternally liberated and living entities who are eternally conditioned. But they're not eternally conditioned. They're conditioned as long as they retain their suspicion of Krishna or their rejection of Krishna. Once they do that, they become Nitya Mukta. They become eternally liberated. Any other, see if we can fit one other comment or question in before the bell tolls at 8 up, or 9 up rather.
Maharaj, thank you, Maharaj.
Jive.
Maharaj, so we were in Brahmajyoti and then we fell down. That's how you began actually, So we were in Brahmajyoti and we came down. Now, once we are purified of our contamination, so we'll go back to spiritual world. That's what Prabhupada calls it, back to Godhead.
Well, yes. Once we left the spiritual world and we left our form and our relationship behind and came to the material world, we're in the Brahmajyoti. I think of the Brahmajyoti as the subway system, If you stand out there on Skimmerhorn and Hoyt, you can, or Bond actually, I think it is, whatever it is there, and you see people coming out of them, you could ask them, where did you come from? And they could truthfully say, we came from the subway, But actually that's not their original source, They live somewhere, They live in, one of these sections of Brooklyn, or possibly in Manhattan, or even the Bronx. They could have come from anywhere and ridden there, or even Queens, and come out of there. So they did come from the subway in one sense, but they didn't come from there originally. And then we could ask, well, they came obviously from their mother at some point. That was another answer we could give. And then we could say, well, before that, then we start getting into the same issue we're talking about. Where did they originally come from? What's the original origin, the final bottom line? Where did everybody come from? And in the Prema Vivarta, there's, Krishna Bahirmukha Hanya Bhogavanchakarya Nikatesa, what is it? Nikatesa? Japati Adhare, right? So, Krishna Bahirmukha Hanya Bhogavanchakarya Nikatasta Maya Tare Japati Adhare. So, when the living entity turns his face away from Krishna, that's what it says, then Maya slaps him down. And then there's Krishna Bhuli Se Jiva Ananda Bahirmukha. So there's another verse that has the same kind of terminology, that turning face away from Krishna. So the idea of being in the Brahmajyoti is there. We don't dispute it. But it's not the ultimate origin. It's the ultimate origin within the context of one already having left the spiritual world. There's a quote where Prabhupada was asked that, do we fall from the Brahmajyoti? And Prabhupada said, there's no question of falling from the Brahmajyoti. The Brahmajyoti is already fallen. So you can't fall from a place that's already fallen. Of course, you can fall further down. It is, in one sense, further down into the material world. But the Brahmajyoti is the place where even Krishna's enemies go, and where the impersonalists are allowed to enter. So how elevated is that? And if that's our original position, then why are we going back to it? Why would Prabhupada even suggest such a thing? It would be really unfortunate use of terminology. So,
last two lines you said, Brahmajyoti means we are already fallen. So it means we were from the spiritual, we were from the Golok Vrindavan, not
Right.
Brahmajyoti.
Right. Right. So this is how Prabhupada has explained it to us, that we came from a relationship with Krishna, a personal relationship with Krishna, because of our misuse of our minute independence. We left. Now, there's some more details there even, exactly how that works, but I don't have time to get into it. And but the idea is that it was our mistake that we're here. We aren't here because Krishna started us off here. And when we when we think about the idea of started it, when we understand fully that we are eternal, not only in the future, but we're eternal also in the past. That means if we say that we didn't start off with Krishna, then that's an awful long time to have been either in the Brahmajyoti or in the Viraja River. And why would Krishna do that? What's the point of that? And then we didn't make a mistake to come here. We were here because that's where Krishna placed us to begin with. So again, that's just part of the overall, I think, evidence that suggests that, first of all, that Prabhupada never gave us this idea that we start off in the Brahmajyoti. Though it is a fact, the living entities are sparks, they come from fire. We do come from the Tatastha Shakti, all those things are correct. That when we enter into an incarnation, we come from the Brahmajyoti or something like that. If we haven't come directly from another incarnation, there's been some time lapse. All that's there. The Sankarshan, as Mahavishnu, is the reservoir of all the Jivas. So all that's there. We're not rejecting that. It's just that there's a larger context. That's what's being missed, when people say that we come from the Brahmajyoti as opposed to falling from the spiritual world, because some people cannot accept the idea. Of course, it says that if one goes back, one never returns. But Prabhupada has commented in a number of cases that, well, generally speaking, that's true. But there are cases where people do come back for one reason or another. And Prabhupada even uses the idea of Jai and Vijay, of them coming to the material world. And where were they? They were in the Vaikuntha world as gatekeepers. So, anyway, I'm going to incur somebody's wrath here very soon, so I better shut this down. And on top of it, I have to go to a Zoom conference too. So thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.